Alrighty. Oh, I'm sort of more making this one for Little Miss than everybody else, but got to have a bit of an overview, you know, why I live off grid, why I do what I do, what matters to me, and sort of a bit of family history probably thrown in there, and some of the sneaky little things I'm seeing happening that the average sheeple doesn't see, which they never do, you know. It reminded me of the GFC, you know, back in '08, when it basically went to about US $48 an ounce for silver, and gold went absolutely stupid. Around that time, I suddenly got interested in the gold price and all that. But I went to a particular bullion dealer who basically had given up on the game temporarily. And, well, it was actually the Australian Bullion Company. And they'd closed a couple of weeks beforehand. And their price was still up of $800 an ounce. Before I knew it, I mean, it just seemed overnight, it was, you know, $1,800, $1,400 just in a few weeks, you know, and at the point they gave up, it was basically $800 an ounce. And they have subsequently reopened, and that's where I first went to get my stuff. At that point, I had sort of been into jewellery. I wanted to start a jewellery shop, basically. More a mail order thing or something I'm going to sell at markets and whatnot. And I ended up selling a whole stack of silver right when it was probably worth jack shit. And if I had known that I could hold on for another 4 months, I could have made a killing. Because it was around that time when everything was changing. I'll give you an example. There was somebody who, I left Boomerang Nurseries temporarily there for about 4 months, and I ended up coming back later, and I was very happy to be offered my old job back. But at that point, everything was going rosy. It was brilliant. I ended up taking a job in, I suppose you could call it the building industry. What we basically were doing was building, bit of wind here again, battery hen setups. There were old systems where they basically had a shed, but it was only like 1 cage height. We can put them in, you know, 8 high or whatever sort of thing. And that job was fantastic. I was basically taking home $1,200 to $1,250 a week, but I was only there for a few weeks because then all the credit froze up. And he said, well, don't come in next week, so I didn't come in next week because we'd just finished one job. I sort of was brought on right at the end of one job that they were doing. It was almost finished, and I went there and done a bit of plumbing and a bit of other stuff. And basically, I rang back every week, and after a few weeks he said, look, I might as well tell you there's no hope. You know, a lot of the other guys have been put off, and I saw one of the other guys, and you know, he'd been cut back something chronic, to only a few days a week, and was expecting to lose his job as well. And basically, this bloke went from having 2 depots, like 2 business sites, employing, holy smoke, 25, 35 people, to not even having a job himself in 6 months. Well, my mum is friends with one of his cousins, and he ended up going and working for them. Yeah, that's how bad it was. And, you know, he was all but flat on his face. I went back there probably 9 months, a year later, and it was only him, his son, and his son's best friend who were working, from 35 people to 3. You know, this is the way it went with everything that was bank funded. Now let's have a little look at all this stuff. What did cause the 2008 collapse? Well, people can say, you know, bad lending practices and stuff like that, and that's pretty much the case. Yeah, it was. But let's look at it on a flat face value. What was it? Well, it was all a whole bunch of contracts. All paper, all agreements, all theories, all numbers, and not a great deal of assets. You know, they sell securities. They'd securitise debt, which basically means turn debt into money is a simple way of putting it. But what it actually is you're turning the ability of someone to pay back that loan every month and every week, as it is here in Australia. You know, it depends. I've got mine's every 3 months. The ability of them to pay that loan back, that becomes an asset. You know, and this whole idea of, well, they're going to pay this loan back with interest, means the debt turns from debt. You know, one person's debt becomes an asset for somebody else. But at the end of the day, it's a whole bunch of shit written on paper, and it's all theory, and it's all expectations and promises. And when all these theories fall to bits, and when people can't keep up to these promises and these agreements that's all written on paper, what are these debt-based securities worth? Friggin' nothing. This is the whole thing. You know, shares and all that, a lot of that is based on the idea that you know, a company is going to have a profit in the future and things are going to go well. And then when there's a big kick in the arse in the company, share price can drop to 40% its value. You know, when it's all just piss and win and expectations, big time, it's called fraud. Like Enron. There's some point where it's good enough to do a certain amount of contracts and stuff, and when it's all holding up correctly, and when it theoretically looks sort of stable, even if the theory is complete bullshit, if people believe it's stable, it'll hold up. And then there might be a point where it all falls to bits. And at that point where it all falls to bits, then some people may call it fraud. The trouble with a lot of this is that nothing changed. Not enough anyway. Only minor things were made. Some of them were good ideas that were, you know, implemented, things that, you know, were fixed up. A couple of small things were fixed up. A couple of other things were made bloody worse with their trying to, you know, reorganise things to avoid another GFC in future. This bloke, I saw him on TV in 2010, and he was writing a bit of a book about, you know, people, the banks and their attitudes of the GFC when it happened and how it all played out and that. And he talked to the CEOs of all the major American banks. And he said, you know, I realised something in all of this. And I mean, I watched this on TV. He was standing there saying, I realised as I was talking to all these different blokes, after I've talked to quite a number of them and was talking to the last few, all of them, the core thing they come out with was, oh, well, we survived. And he said, I had a sense that none of them actually learnt from what happened. They all just said, well, we're still here, and that's the good thing. And we made it, others didn't, but we made it. So now let's just move on, and it was back to business as usual. And that's what he said. He said, I believe that nothing was actually learnt. It's almost like as though the misery and all that was just compartmentalised. It was sad that everybody else I used to know went broke. But I'm still here and I'm still going, and let's forget about it and just continue on. Let's forget about it and continue on. You sort of look at it a different way, though. In 2008, what caused a lot of the collapse was stupid theories and stupid contracts that couldn't be held up. And it was all paper and promises and theories. And it all fell to bits. There are some great things there. You could get a house loan with nothing, with no assets, no job, no income. You could get a house loan. For, you know, like in my case here, I've got an interest-only loan. Now, there were people whose income was so poor. I mean, they were getting 5 hours a week at a pizza takeout place, you know, and their income was so drab that they couldn't even afford the interest on the loans. So they couldn't do what I've done, which was basically get the same loan that my uncle had from the same place, and get an interest-only loan and just pay the interest alone and then pay the capital off as I feel like paying it off. They couldn't even afford the interest, so they created these loans for them where they would actually get them to pay none of the principal and only half of the interest, and the other half of the interest they would tack on top of the principal. But the value of the house was going up so fast it didn't matter. The fact of the matter was these houses were dramatically overvalued. Houses that were $70,000 or $80,000 in Detroit then fell to $6.5 grand, and now you can probably get them for about $200. I mean, it's just, you know, pitiful the way it sort of all goes. But this is the thing. It's all just theory. Now, they went from mark-to-market accounting, and to stop all this collapse happening another time, you know what they decided? We want to go from mark-to-model accounting. So they decided to go from mark-to-market accounting to what's known as mark-to-model accounting, or as some people call it, mark-to-fantasy accounting. What they mean by model is that you can base all these theories and that, you know, you can base, not your theories, but your interest that you're going to earn, the profits you're going to make, can be based on a model of how you expect or think it's going to go. In other words, whatever your fantasized theory of how you assume this mine is going to go, this power station, this other investment is going to go, that's what you can base everything on, is a theory. So now they're even not digging into the market value, but digging into the theoretical value that they fantasized and made up. And that's what all the banking is based on now. And it's, you know, this is in the United States at least. I don't know what it is in Australia. But we're all tracking really gloriously, you know, for another big kick in the arse, because basically there's going to become a time where bonds investors realise that there's no point buying any more US bonds, and at that point, very, very quickly, and I've heard it's happened already, is that basically the incoming taxes in the United States will outstrip the interest payments, and I believe that it's already at that point anyway, and then they basically end up doing them a lot like those loans I was talking about, where they borrow more money just to pay the existing interest, plus whatever they want to do this time around. And then, you know, and if you look at the way the debt in the US is tracking, it has basically been going along slowly up, and now it's just like straight up like that. It's going up like there's no tomorrow. And, you know, that does signify that basically their taxes aren't even covering their interest payments. And, you know, pretty soon, well, they'll default. And, you know, what happened in Greece, where it all basically led to about 1/3 unemployment or worse, I think it was about 35% unemployment and stuff like that. You know, where everybody just says, okay, we've had enough because we know you can't pay this shit back and it's never going to be paid back, and they all just pull out and walk away, and the value drops like a stone, and the country is left to just rot in hell like Greece. You know, and this is the thing, like, they had 35% unemployment, and those that were employed were getting a lousy bloody, you know, $30 a week on top of what their rent payment was. So basically they could rent a house, but they couldn't afford to even turn the lights on. They were battling to, you know, they couldn't afford to even own a car, let alone drive the damn thing, and, you know, battling to pay for food. It just didn't make any sense, you know, and they went on protests about that, but what could they do, you know? Like, how can you protest that you're broke? It doesn't even make any sense in a way. You know, I understand they're protesting because they're bloody unhappy, but protesting that you're essentially broke, it's a little too, you know, it's too little too late. It's sort of like as though, you know, I overdraw my bank account and then go down to the bank and stand out the front of the bank with a placard saying, you know, you bastards should give me money even though I've got nothing left in my account. Based on what? I'm broke. You got to protest about this sort of shit before it happens. You know, you got to protest and say to the government, look, I don't want you to run us broke. Not, you know, we're broke, how come I can't get welfare? You know, because it's too little too late. You know, and this is the thing. It was like when the gold price went up. All these idiots said, oh, we should be getting into gold. No, it's too late. You missed out on it. You know, a lot of things, by the time the public notices it, it's too friggin' late. And that's it. You know, and they're all so busy living their life and consuming all this Chinese friggin' crap, you know, all this pointless bullshit that they don't need, you know, and it's all, I'm having a good life, this, that and the other, and when it all hits the flaming deck and the whole blooming house of cards comes down, then when it's too late they get in a panic. Well, how about if you could preempt all this shit falling to bits? And put yourself in the right position. It's a bit like knowing that, well, like the time, you know, we pretty much ran out of diesel here for a little while. If you had inside knowledge, and you knew that we were going to run out of diesel before long, and you had a diesel car and a diesel generator and diesel tractor, what would you do? You wouldn't sit there with your dick in your hand, wait till the Bowser runs out and goes, oh shit, I need diesel to get to work now. No, you wouldn't do that. You'd go like a mad bastard and fill every jerry can you could get your hands on and spend a whole week's pay just on fuel to make sure that you are going to be bloody fine regardless of the rest of the sheep. And that's exactly where I am. I don't like the idea of spending a heap of money, not because I like to, you know, live in an old house and drive a 15-year-old vehicle that's actually not such a bad vehicle at all. And, you know, I'm not sort of sitting there trying to buy every nicety known to man and live a fantastic life now. Because I can see that all these stupid contracts and all these stupid theories are going to hit the deck like a stack of shit before too long. Yet again, we're going to face all this crap all over again, you know, and, you know, it may affect my job, it may not. Considering I'm on a base wage that is, holy hell, it's about 3/5 of what the base wage of, you know, the other people I work with is. I hope that will allow me to retain my job compared to some of the other blokes who are just labourers there and not actual qualified plasterers. You know, I hope that, because they're on $30 an hour, and I'm technically, my base is $14.11 an hour, that, you know, I'll be there. You know, the actual plasterers, they're looking at about $35 an hour. You know, and I saw that same thing happen when I was in my original apprenticeship. One of the blokes there, who was actually the smug little supervisor, told me that if anybody gets the sack, you'll be the first to go. Well, the funny thing was, it was the sandblaster who was the first to go, because all the spray painters could do sandblasting. And let's face it, I was on such a low wage that it wasn't too hard to keep me on. I don't know what will happen in regards to my job, but one thing I do know for certain is that I'm not going to stand there with my dick in my hand and wait for the whole lot to hit the friggin' deck. I'm not going to decide that I want a nice life right now and go and do something ridiculous like... Little Miss likes this idea that, you know, we should go live in the city. Okay, well, she told me that the $20,000 mortgage debt I had on this place was insurmountable and I should sell it and get rid of it, while her parents are paying more than $16,000 a year in rent. What sort of person is stupid enough to own a house, leave it deserted all week, come back to it on the weekends, and then rent a place in the city when they could have spent that $16,000 on, I don't know, preparing for shit going down the drain in the next couple of years? Yeah. I think I'll prepare for troubles and live cheaply as opposed to live every day without much of a thought any more past the next month. You know, I don't live like that, and I don't suggest anybody else does, but the vast majority of them do. They only know about shit when it turns up on the news. You know, I go digging a little bit deeper, and I realise that if nothing's changed in the banking world, we're going to hit the same stinking problems that we hit before. You know, and look, let's face it, there's 3 countries that could ditch out. And there's quite a chance there'll be the domino effect. The US might have some serious bloody issues with paying its bonds and its debts and stuff like that. And then the Chinese will pull out, and then, well, you know, the inevitability of stuff in China in regards to their... There's one thing with the Chinese. I heard about this idea that basically what it is with the Chinese, they've had it so hard for so long that they don't consume barely a cracker. They save absolutely chronically. And I can tell you, having worked for 2 different Chinese bosses already, that they'll always buy the cheapest option. It's just the way it is. My uncle can tell you from years of hanging around Chinese and having several Chinese girlfriends that they are terribly tight. The thing is, these people, their consumption level compared to their productivity level, they're some of the most productive people there are, but their consumption is almost non-existent, and they save almost everything they make. Well, this has caused a bit of a trouble inside the country. They're so gung-ho about producing, they're so gung-ho about production, that it's become production just for the point of production. I never knew what it meant to grow too fast until I started to realise a few things about China. Things might not really be quite as glorious as they seem from the outside when they're building bridges that are 3 miles over a river, and these 6-lane bridges are so highly needed that they get about 2 or 3 cars a day. So they build all this bridge, but there's no demand for it. See, they're building far, far, far beyond their demand or their consumption. And some people were saying that a few of these things are starting to fall to bits in regards to like the houses. They got so many houses, it's ridiculous. There's so many apartments. They put a reasonable price on them, but all that market is starting to fall to bits. You know, I had seen things, and that some of these apartments, they're priced at $300,000, and there's a bloke who, well, replied to one of my comments, and he said he got a nice joint for $20,000, and there's basically the housing bubble is getting close to bursting over there, so they believe. Now, there's a chance that one could trigger the other, or, you know, the American debt issue could trigger the Chinese, or the Chinese housing bubble could trigger the American debt issue when they all decide to sell their bonds because they've lost so much in the housing bubble, and, you know, they need the money back, and then all of a sudden they sell their bonds and then realise that the bond market is flooded, and that could bring down the US, or vice versa. You know, they sort of, you never know how it's all going to exactly play out. Japan is basically heading to the point where, same thing as the US, you know, they can't afford the interest payments, and it's basically, you know, pretty much close to the point of game over. They've been printing out like hell. And you look at Europe, I mean, it's getting so full of shit in Europe that they're not even talking about low interest rates, about 0%. They're talking about negative interest rates. This isn't where you go and get out a loan and you pay the interest. This is where you get out a loan and they pay you more. I mean, negative interest rates literally means you don't pay interest. They pay you interest for borrowing their money to begin with. I mean, if that isn't going to cause hyperinflation, what won't? You know? But this is the whole thing, you know. I'm buggered black and blue if I'm going to go and give up an off-grid life, pay $16,000 a year rent, pay for everything I eat, and every time I want to be warmed up and every time I want to be cooled down, everything is based on a bill that I've got to pay some other mob. Everything has got to be piped in, trucked in, and here I am, jammed in so close to my neighbours that I can hear them fart. I'm not living a life like that, you know. And, you know, as much as it may look like I'm living frugally now, there's Chinese who would just about have a shit fit, you know, that I've got a place where the roof doesn't leak and I've actually even got solar power, so, you know, I can do things like, you know, turn on one of these umpteen switches on the wall, you know, and do things like, well, you know, charge up the cordless drill battery and stuff like that. You know, I'm living not too bad comparative to Chinese. I'm actually living shockingly good compared to how my uncle lived here for 12 years. You know, because I don't light candles at night just to have some amount of light here. I don't need to. I've got a solar system, you know, and sort of, if he wanted to cook up something for lunch, he didn't even have a propane stove, you know, and while it looks like I'm living cheaply, there's a reason for all this. I'm preparing for the future. I'm not preparing to end up like all the other people, like a whole bunch of Greek city dwellers who, you know, found they've lost their job but the bills are still coming in because, you know, well, they don't have a solar system and whatnot. But that's my position, and I'm charging ahead, all guns blazing, to continue investing into something that has been used as currency for 6,000 years. I've seen stuff in the time of the Roman Empire, silver coins, 1/10 of an ounce. I've seen these damn things on YouTube. I've seen them for sale on auction sites, you know, and they're quite shockingly good for for the time they were manufactured. You know, the quality is quite surprising for several thousand years ago. But, you know, this is the thing. I've got trust in silver. I've also got trust in gold. And between the two, I plan not to fall flat on my face and then turn around and say we didn't see it coming.